Hello out there. It's Groundhog Day 2019. I'm going to spend a little time talking about your grandfather, Saul Aidman, and telling you some things that he told me that he's really never told anybody else. And the first thing I got to do is explain why he told me and why he didn't tell anyone else. And basically, it was because it was a state secret. And when he participated in World War II, had he shared any of this, he would have been eligible for immediate execution, a firing squad. The work he did in World War II is currently known as the Silent Service. They haven't, even to this day, declassified what he did. You won't see any stories, any great raw war movies about what he did directly. You'll see some stories about some of the things that it impacted. So if you see anything about code breaking or the Enigma, or basically what's called signals intelligence, radio, that's what he was involved in. So, excuse me. Now to why Lance Hagen in San Antonio, Texas in 2019 is sharing with his grandchildren what he did, and might even include stuff his parents don't know, mostly because they've only heard it from me. Let me explain that. Vern Whitehouse, one of your father's cousins and her brother, were taken in by your father and raised, or by your grandfather and grandmother, and raised as their own, as siblings to your father, from the time she was about 7 years old, because she was orphaned, lost both of her parents at that time. And when I was 27 years old, I joined the military, and I met her in San Antonio, and we married a year later and went to, from San Antonio, I had a year of Russian training, and then another year in San Angelo, Texas, of training on how to use the Russian language in a military context. That ended up with a couple trips to survival school, one in Washington State in November, and a water survival school in Homestead Air Force Base, which is subsequently blown off the face of the map by Hurricane Andrew, in Biscayne Bay. So from there, I was to travel for an assignment over in England as a flying Russian linguist, flying out of RAF Mildenhall. That was the first opportunity, that trip to Miami for water survival, and then our movement overseas, was the first opportunity to meet Saul. Okay, we kind of eloped, and Fern had to stay there because I didn't have permission to take my wife overseas with me until I got a living quarters. So we kind of moved in with him, especially Fern, and we got to know him. I'm telling you all this as background because you've probably heard a lot of things about him, or maybe you haven't, and you should. Okay, he was notorious for being cantankerous, rough. Some of your older cousins would cry at the dinner table just based on him barking at him. Okay, he did that with everybody. Okay, I grew up in that kind of a background. All of my male family members of authority figures all treated each other, especially the young children, that way. So it was kind of secondhand to me. They were from totally different cultures. So he started out the first time we met by making a rough offhand comment about me being a redneck, which I accepted. I'm like, yeah, okay, you're right, I'm a redneck. And he spent most of the rest of the evening apologizing for that. And there's the key to who he was. Okay, and now this is going to get to the Holocaust soon enough, but I need you to understand what World War II made him, who he was before he went there, and what he and I had in common. Okay, Um, while I was there, just in this example, now we were treated to a version of La Cage aux Folles, the Birdcage, that was playing in Miami, Broadway play playing in Miami, and it's all about cross-dressers, men that look like women, and it's very well done, beautiful, beautiful play. Your grandfather, Saul, had this terrible reputation of saying obtuse things. So a lot of the more cultivated siblings of his and family members were worried that he would embarrass, because it was about transvestites, that he would embarrass the family, right? What they had forgotten was he was actually looking. Well, he had a store in Little Havana, and there were transvestites that he worked with every day. Quite common. I forgot a lot of things, but it came to fruition that night, and that's why I'm sharing it with you. There was like 17 of us, and there was a row of 16 seats, and he was the one that gave up his seat so that everybody else could sit together at this special occasion. So much for being this old curmudgeon. The highlight of that was after the play was over, we found him again. Where was he? He was speaking to the French director in French, right? Because starts to become where his unique talents are. So not only was he not embarrassing, but he actually had a relationship with the play we participated in at a much different level than the rest of us. So, why am I telling you this? Nobody else. I was 27 years old when I joined the military. Saul was 27 years old when he was drafted into the military. World War II, he was a French teacher in high school. He also spoke German and Flemish, and well-educated, brilliant man. So he had a child at the time, I do believe, or a child on the way. That notwithstanding, they drafted him into the Army. Okay. So he was a reluctant warrior. They took him to a special training in Indiana. Okay. I won't go into a lot of detail about that. He didn't go into a lot of detail about that. He was very reluctant to talk about it. We can assume that it was similar to the 2 years of training I'd just been through, but more concentrated. I will tell you that the National Security Agency, its modern roots, come out of that space in Indiana where he was trained. They keep the highest secrets our nation has. The keys to the codes and the keys to how to break other people's codes. I started speaking to him in Russian. We played chess together. Did a lot of things, and he's like, I don't understand how you can be telling me this. And that's where I updated him on the fact that, yes, I was well aware that he could have been shot for telling us what happened or what he did in World War II, but those rules have changed slightly. A lot of things still can't be discussed, but that's not one of them. So that's my key. I was the same age as he was when I joined the military. I had the same background as he did. I was getting ready to venture off into a similar world. Not quite, it was the Cold War. It wasn't World War II. He had some advice for me, and we'll keep that for last. It's a good punchline. And he was willing to share some things. So he was trained, and he was assigned to Patton's, to a group in Patton's Army. At the time, the problem for Patton was he was moving too fast, right? Patton wasn't put in charge until towards the end of the war, and they moved through. There had been some very bad upsets prior to that, but they moved through Europe fairly fast. So the first day Private Aidman, was at war and they were on the move. The colonel put him in the Jeep with him, and they went ahead to the next town they were all going to move to. And because he spoke Flemish, because he spoke French, because he spoke later German, he made arrangements with the locals for Hershey bars and nylons and some other stuff that they had in their rations for everybody in their platoon or one squad or whatever it was, a group, to sleep in beds, eat eggs for breakfast, fresh eggs. Unheard of in war. And from then on, that was it. They were chasing Patton's army, with Patton's army through Europe, living high on the land because of Saul's talents, because he knew how to speak those languages. He also had other responsibilities, okay? But again, even today, those won't be told. But study about the Enigma machine, study about the code breaking, understand what happens when military movements happen and what happens on the radio, what happens with telegraph. And you'll get an idea. It was very important and very classified. Again, he couldn't talk about it or be executed. That's how important it was that nobody knew what we were doing or how we could do it. Now to the Holocaust. Okay. He went into Germany. I must say I lost an uncle April 1st, 1945. Just almost at the end of the world, the victory over Europe, end of the war, victory over Europe Day. I have my father and two other uncles over there were involved in the war some way. It was a terrible time. Your grandfather knew how to make the most of it. He decided to start collecting European stamps. So he collected stamps as they went through Europe. And here he was, drafted, but using his talents in a way nobody else could. Okay. Then comes the liberation of the concentration camps. I'm not sure which one it was that he came to, but they did come to one of the concentration camps. And he was the only one that could speak to the prisoners or the guards. So he did, and they had to address all that. He was also put in charge of keeping the guards prisoners. Something dark happened there, something very dark. I'm all certain some guards got killed. And I don't know that he's ever shared what happened there. But as you can imagine, with family from Europe, in Europe, with the war all around him, he pressed through. Now, modern day war, they don't actually follow the doctrine of war. World War II they did. Okay, so the doctrine of war says that when you occupy a country, you occupy it. You have to control communication. So as victory in Europe took hold, his work just began, right? A lot of guys were just going around partying, drinking wine, doing whatever. Not for your grandfather. Your grandfather had to vet the radio and newspapers of the German government we put in place to make sure they weren't sending secret signals to hidden Nazis so that they could restart the war. So that became his job. He was in charge of what is known as psychological operations. That is, you get local native speakers and presses and radio to tell your story. And you make sure that nothing but your story gets told. And he did that. And he did it very well. He did it so well, as a matter of fact, that the State Department said, you know what, Saul Aidman, I think you should come to work for us. You don't really know what that means, because if you look at a James Bond novel or anything else, everybody, whether they're a spy or a diplomat, they all work out of the State Department. So All we know for sure is they sent him back to London to get more language training. And he was no longer a reluctant warrior. He had defeated the Germans. It was over. He found a new career for himself. He was in Europe. And he thought, you know what? I think I could go for this. And that's when a series of bad things started to happen. So, and that bad things speak a lot to where we are today. So he flew back after he'd been in London for several months training. He flew back to Germany, and he got off the plane. First thing that happened is a lieutenant, now he was an enlisted man, as was I, a lieutenant yelled at him. This man had never seen a day of war, saying, "Where's your cover? Where's your hat?